everyone! Welcome to the road to digital art. Welcome to our poop cameras.
Hey! Yeah.
We know we're not going to be using those cameras much. We're going to try to figure out... Go ahead.
I'm looking like I'm on a conference call from the 90s, or like if in a reality TV show where like the family calls in, and like, I'm so proud that you managed to make it to the top 3, darling. We always knew you could do it. It's terrible.
Oh, yeah. Basically, we figured out a way to make it so we can screen share both of our screens and also have our cameras, but the tiny whiny problem is that our cameras are super tiny. They're like an inch by 2 inches.
They're like
maybe?
an inch by an inch and a half, maybe.
Yeah. So we have some overlay updating to probably do, and we'll make it work for today. So hopefully you guys still enjoy it, even though it looks like potato cam. So I guess I should kind of like run you guys through what our plan is today and how we're going to be doing all the things. But basically, welcome to the road to digital art. This is where I'm basically learning how to make digital art with Olirant. Oh, Ollie's going to be our teacher and guiding us along our way. So if you are new to digital art and you are curious about how to like make Photoshop work, how to install your tablet, I don't know, whatever. You can toss us questions, and I will try to feed those to Ollie, and he will do his best to answer them. And along the way, we'll learn each week how to do different things, and it should be very, very exciting.
Yeah.
I'm not terrible at art, but I'm also very, very new. So
you're creative.
Yeah, I'm a creative. There we go. I'm a creative person, but I may not be the most knowledgeable when it comes to digital stuff. So he will work us through it. So Ollie, tell us who you are and why you're qualified to give us the learning lesson.
I'm qualified because I was asked. I'm Ollie. All my stuff is at Twitch and Twitter /Olirant. I have a degree in game art, and I actually learned a lot in the field of concept art. And then decided, and 3D art, and then I decided, I'm not going to do that, and I'm now an illustrator who focuses mostly on fantasy things, so that's totally the focus.
Sometimes, I think right now I'm better at replicating, so if I look at something, the Bob Ross painting that I did is a good example. If I look at something, I can paint what that looks like, right? But like painting something from my mind is like such a different concept.
And that's definitely my focus for all things, has been that sort of taking imagination to paper ever since I started drawing when I was like a wee babby, So,
yeah, awesome.
That's why we're gonna do this. This first episode is going to be very Photoshop based. But future episodes are going to be more general art. So if you are a traditional artist, if you use like pencil and paper, lessons in future episodes will be more relevant. This episode is basically just Photoshop specific things, although if you use a digital drawing program that's not Photoshop and it's pixel based instead of vector based, most things will apply sort of, just not exactly.
So
I'll explain that difference
First
later.
question we have is, what type of tablet would you recommend? And I think a lot of people recommended the same one that I have today.
We have the same tablet. Mine is about a year older and has been plonked around a whole bunch more. What brand is it exactly? It's a Wacom.
Yeah, Wacom.
It's the smallest, cheapest one they do.
Yeah, it's the Wacom Intuos small tablet.
If you're using Photoshop, you don't need any more than this, because Photoshop has a whole bunch of suites that are based around how pen pressure works on tablets. So even though this doesn't have the biggest variety of pen pressure, and that's really the main thing you get between different tablets is size and how much pen pressure variety there is, Photoshop doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter. I know some people, and we actually talked about this a bit on one of our like pre-show chats, who use things called Cintiqs. We actually draw on a screen, and some people just prefer that.
Looks so much easier.
I find it harder.
Yeah, it looks so much easier.
I've been doing this for like 6-7 years,
Yeah, I think I know a lot of people with the same tablet, and then I know a couple people who have gotten the larger version of it, who like that as well. And then obviously all the people that I work with in the game design field all have Cintiqs.
Cintiqs is used a lot in game design, especially in concept art and 3D art, which are the things I'm meant to be taught in. And I was actually taught how to use a Cintiq, but I don't like them as much as regular old tablet. And then there's a lot of times you have like a laptop with a touch screen or an actual tablet, like an iPad-y type thing. Those have nice drawing suites too, and I can actually recommend one. It's an app on the Play Store that I use when sometimes I draw on my phone. You can just draw with, if you have a pen on your phone, or just with your fingers. There are also alternatives for that.
Yeah, you can actually use the tablet with your fingers as well. At least the one that I have, you can.
Yours can, mine can't, but yours is newer.
I didn't get the one that is the newest one, which doesn't allow you to, which is weird.
There's a lot. Well, the thing is, there's a lot of whack-em. These tablets are specialized for a field. I just got like a general art one. Some of them do have pen and touch. Some others. Honestly, if you're using Photoshop, you don't need pen and touch. What's it called? They call it like finger touch.
Yeah.
But it is an option if you're doing things on actual physical tablets or on your phone or something. It is totally an option, and some of this knowledge will apply to that. And I've seen some people who've done some brilliant things on that. I think the best thing I've ever drawn was like one Christmas I was bored at a family gathering and painted a snowman. But it's nice to have those tools just in case.
Yeah. But I've been really enjoying the one that I have, and I will definitely post a link. If you're watching this on YouTube later, I'll post a link down in the description as well for you guys to easily grab whatever that is. And for those of you watching live, yes, this will be on YouTube, cut down and edited into a more consumable way than us rambling. I'm
gonna ramble like a lot. I won't promise there's not gonna be tangents about what our favorite food is, but most of my streams have that, so it might happen.
And take it away, Ollie.
Alrighty. So, like I said, today is mostly Photoshop. Like I said, if you don't use Photoshop, there are a lot of other art tools available. I know a lot of people who I'm friends with use something called Paint Tool Sci. And then there's others. And actually, even honestly, the newest version of Microsoft Paint is actually fine if you're just starting out.
Oh yeah, the 3D art. The new.
No, not even that. Just the most current. It might actually be called 3D art. I don't know.
I think it's called like 3D Paint or something like that.
It's pretty. It's okay. It's like way better than what I had when I was starting. So
yeah.
And there's also if it's for people who draw like manga stuff, there's like specialized suites for that. You don't need that. I will say, advice-wise, and this is advice I was given when I was learning. If you are serious about digital art, get Photoshop. It is expensive, but it is worth it, because if you ever intend to work with other people with your art, I have had multiple opportunities where I send Photoshop files to Maggie or to other people I'm working for. Photoshop is industry standard, so if you are interested in becoming like a professional illustrator or concept artist or whatever, Photoshop is a valuable tool, and I believe there is some level of trial available, so definitely do try it out. But basically, when it comes to digital art software, there's either vector-based or pixel-based. Photoshop is pixel-based. Basically means it uses pixels to draw things. Vector-based art is usually used for graphic design, which means things like Adobe Illustrator, which used to be called Fireworks, and that always confuses me.
Yeah.
Is a vector-based tool, better for graphic design, better for making logos, great in its own way.
I like it for also making kind of maps, oddly.
Yeah, well, it would be better for that. If we will
I used it a lot for game design when I was doing level design. Weirdly.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure. That would be the sort of tool that would be even better for that. But any tool that is pixels based, a lot of this advice, not the specificities of the buttons, but the sort of things I'm going to be explaining, because I'm basically assuming that Maggie knows nothing. Maggie does know many a thing. She uses Photoshop a lot. I'm going to assume you know nothing.
Fair enough.
So honestly, we're going to straight up start off with the from the beginning with files, making new canvases and things. There is a cool thing about Photoshop, which is why it runs, reasons why it's so great, is that there's this work tab that actually has all the things you've been working on recently. And
you can see mine is mostly thumbnails and lots of roll for it stuff.
illustrations and overlays, and here's this overlay. Ooh, wonder who made that. And that's super useful. And also Photoshop is really useful because it has like a really good emergency save function where if you just forget to save something, as long as you don't say, no, I don't want to save it, which I did recently with the first draft of these overlays because I'm really stupid. It will actually, like, next time you open it up and be like, did you forget to save this? And that's super useful because I've known people who've lost entire year-long projects just because they haven't saved and backed up correctly, which is not very smart. But first step, as with many things, is creating a file. So you go to File, you go to New. Boom. File new. The thing is, making canvas in Photoshop is very easy. You have a whole bunch of options. This is way nicer than it used to be. The current version of Photoshop with all its additions is really nice and smooth to use. One of the best reasons to get an up-to-date version of Photoshop and a subscription is that they constantly update it and they have support that actually works and all those things. It will save the most recent canvases you used. So for example, I often use this canvas, which is a very weird size because it's related to multiple projects I do, and it will save everything. It'll save the width, the height, the orientation, the resolution, the color mode, all that stuff. Up here, it has a bunch of presets that are super useful. We're mostly going to use Web 1920 by 1080 because that's what we're used to. You know, that's what we're going to use. Over here, all sorts of goodies. This is what I mean. It's got pixels, but also if you're working on other things where it needs to be inches, centimeters. Some commissions I've done for books are like, specifically, this painting needs to be like 3 inches by 3 inches or something like that. Boom, there you go. It, because of how Photoshop works, it just standardizes everything brilliantly. Resolution is essentially, is a little weird, but essentially how many pixels are in that area. So even if you have the same canvas size, a higher resolution image will be bigger, but it will still be the same canvas size. But it will be bigger, which is a little counterintuitive, but 72 is standard for most things. For my illustrations, I actually bump it up even more, but that's something we can mess around with later. Color mode, don't mess with color mode. That's like messing with the fundamental rules of the universe. Don't mess with it. You can add more colors, but these ones that they put you on default are what most people always use. So really don't mess with them. There's a lot of settings in Photoshop, don't mess with them. And then you can actually change your background color to not be default white. And advanced options, you've got a whole bunch of things for if it was specifically designed for a device that, again, don't mess with the fundamental rules for the universe. It's probably not a good idea. The default settings for making canvases are mostly fine. You can also set a name for your file at the start. Don't always need to, but you know, if you've got something good, like, you can. I don't know. I don't know if that's actually props you where to save it, but you can, like, Photoshop basics. I spelled Photoshop wrong. Well, good job. And then it opens it, and then it goes, hey, I gave you artboards, which we don't actually want, and I need to now remember how to turn off artboards. Ollie, what are artboards? Honestly, those are one of the things about Photoshop I don't really understand. They're sort of a next level thing.
What's down on the right as a layer?
You don't need. Yeah, right? You essentially just delete that. Don't worry about it. Oh, never mind. We're gonna make a new file because I forgot this is how it does basic files. I haven't made a default without this for a while. Aha! So what we did is over here, it goes artboards, yes or no. Turn that to no. Artboards just mess things up. We may have a lesson in the future about how artboards work. It's multiple documents in one document. Yes, it's used. It's more for graphic design than illustration. Exactly. Less relevant for us now. It can be useful for doing things like having reference art in your own images, which is good. But you know, not something that we actually intend on using today, at the very least. Here we go. We have our nice little, beautiful little canvas. And how Photoshop has been set up. Yours is set up a little differently to mine because yours is basically the default plus you spent like a couple of minutes tweaking it. And and now I am lit up like an angel because we both have bright white canvas. Well, obviously I think one of the best places to begin is layers, right? The first layer on a Photoshop file is always the background. That is locked in. Unless you change it in the future, it basically can't, it can be edited, it can't be deleted. You can, when you have multiple files, you can disable that. What I always like to do is not have my canvas be pure white. So what I do is I put a sort of middling gray. So if you go to color on the right side of your screen, which is right side of the manager, in the navigator section, your color wheel is going to be different to mine because mine is actually an extension I paid for. This is a paid extension called Colorus, which is a good idea if you're super into illustration. Basically, just take a sort of middling gray, pop that on with, select that. You want pure gray. You don't want any red. You got a little red in there. Drag it all the way to the left. Yep. Then go to the fill tool, which is down. Oh, no, for you, it's going to be this here, the gradient tool under the eraser. So if you hold it, fill tool, paint bucket tool. Every tool has multiple sort of related tools. Paint bucket, click. Congratulations. I always do this for multiple reasons. One, it doesn't hurt your eyes if you're staring at a canvas that's gray on black all day instead of white on black. Which is genuinely very important when this is a living. Second of all, a thing you will learn soon is that color is not a thing that's going to exist in your world for multiple lessons. Don't need to worry about color. Everything is going to be values of black and white. And when you're sketching out a painting, this means you can use both black and white. So if you go, hey, here's where lighting is going to be, you can pop some pretty white stuff on the side. But if you say, for example, oh no, I put the wrong color. Oh no, this is a horrible alien green. This isn't right. Like most things, Control Z works, but it doesn't work how it does in other things. For Photoshop, you want to use Control Alt Z, and that actually goes back more than once. Control Z will only ever go back once. Why? I can't tell you. Control Alt Z is your go-to instead of Control Z. After a while, it'll just become muscle memory. Most things are muscle memory for me. And they will be for you when you get used to it. That is super important to know, because otherwise you'll be like, why can't I undo things? Control Z will help you. Like most programs, there is a limit to how far you can go back. You can change that in the files. That will obviously make your computer cry. And if you're working on big canvases, which we might be in the future, you don't want to do that.
I like Eris's comment. Eris Ann said, Adobe thinks the world is flat and color wheels are square. Wheels are square.
And that's exactly why I have this circular thing. So you can more use color theory. You can do all these cool things like have the opposite color related.
Yeah, that sounds good. Cool.
I may give you a link to this in the future when we start messing around with color. But don't worry about it. Color won't exist. I know it might be hard for you, Maggie, but imagine a world without color for as long as possible.
No.
So speaking about color, if you've not noticed, everything in Photoshop on the UI is modular. So for example, Maggie here has a navigator. My navigator is actually off screen right now because I use it for streams. I can pop it back here. But you can drag them off. You can drag them to be off screen. If you do that, I don't even know if it shows up on screen. If you just click and drag where it says navigator, and pull it to the side, it should pull free.
Yeah.
And then if you click the little arrows on the side, it can minimize, it can increase, you can do all the things. You can put that on the top bar, you can put that on the side toolbar, you can put that with your color. You can
and I think by default, it doesn't actually show up, so you have to go into Windows and select it on.
All of these windows are things, and for some reason they have things like adjustments as one of the defaults as well. Things that are useful, but you're not going to be using so often that necessarily need to be here. And as you start painting, as you start using Photoshop, you figure out where you want things to be. I have this set up where my navigator's off screen, and I have this color history thing, and then I have layers. That's what I like. Right now, you, for example, have your brush settings on the right. I don't really use that because I only ever use like 2 brushes. So I don't need that, because when I need to change brushes, I can just open brushes. But we'll get back to brushes. And then all these other things in Windows are valuable in multiple other ways, but we'll come about their usages when we do. Right now, all you need is color and layers. And first of all, I'm gonna teach you about layers. So if you go down at this little tiny button down here, it goes layer. You can also do, what did you do? Like,
I hit a button on my tablet.
Yes, that is cheating. You can't do that. This tablet has a create new layer button. But for the kids at home, this button down here, create new layer. There is a shortcut for it.
You can also go top, layer new.
That's it, layer, the obvious one, right? It'll always ask you to do this. What I have done, and I don't know where I've done that, I basically told it to never ask me questions again, because you can change all the layer settings in the layer panel specifically. So if you see around here, it says like kind, it says normal, it says opacity, fill. Don't worry about them yet. I'll explain them in a bit, but you want those multiple layers. And then of course you can choose which layers are visible. You can change a whole bunch of cool things about layers, but the most important thing is you want to have a layer that is not background, because you don't ever want to draw on the background. You don't want to realize you've been drawing in the background for a while. The reason why you don't worry about not having so many undos as some programs is because, honestly, you should be doing everything in a layer basis anyway. So if you do find out you've made a mistake a while ago, hopefully it's on a different layer. So, and now with that layer, you can also name layers. You can put layers into folders. That's super important. Next to the new layer button, there's a folder button. Boom, remember that. Folders and layers, you can drag them and drop them, just kind of like how you would imagine. Don't worry about that now, just so you know it's a thing. And this is something you already know, Maggie, because we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Layer management is super important.
So important. And label your stuff.
I know people who paint everything on one layer, and you can't do that. And that's actually going to be how we start most of things, because that's a better way to learn. Because then you can't go back on your mistakes. It's like learning how to draw in pen, which is actually how will recommend how to learn to draw, because going back can be a crutch, and you don't want to do that all the time. But in bigger paintings, it's nice to be able to organize your layers. I have, for the last 2 or 3 years, I have a sort of layer progression every illustration uses. So I can go to any illustration and I can figure out where the lighting is, where the shading is, where the color layers are. I know where they are because they've been the same for like 3 years. And
happy little accidents on one layer.
Happy little accidents. Happy accidents totally happen. Other buttons down here, we're not going to worry about right now. We're not even going to worry about layer settings right now, not properly, because what I'm going to tell you about, Maggie, I'm going to tell you about tools. All up here on the left, the fun part, tools. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's a basic knowledge about tools. You got your move tool, and that's for moving other assets. Say if I'm going to like just draw like a happy little man. I'm going to draw like a happy little man. And there's like, I'm a professional illustrator. Now, because he's on the layer, you can move the entire layer with the move tool. Great, lovely. You may notice looking around, every tool, if you click on a tool section and hold it, it'll show an alternate like it did with the gradient tool. I see you've noticed the quick colors edit down there. There's more things to learn in the future. Happy little man. And then that should move the entire layer. You don't even need to do that. If you just left click, move the layer. If you hold down, you'll notice every tool has its little family of tools. They're all related to a hotkey. Some of these hotkeys you're going to need to remember. Honestly, you're not going to use the move tool much consciously, so you don't need to remember that hotkey. The second one, the marquee tool, is what you were trying to do. The marquee tool is like, you can select sections of places, then you go back to the move tool and you murder. Oh no, it's so terrible. Bam, warp. And that's
only one eyeball.
And that's one of the great advantages of digital art over traditional art. Although there will be homework, and my homework is basically
you can do this, guys, and then I can make sure that he has the same eyeball.
That is something you can do, although there's several things you should learn about copy pasting in Photoshop. I mean, which is relevant because it's totally the area. I'm glad you brought it up. Copying pasting by default creates a new layer, and that new layer has just an eyeball in it.
Oh yeah, just that's not good. But I can combine them.
You can merge them. If you go down, it's near the bottom before no color. Merge layers.
Merged.
Boom. That's how I do a lot of things when I do copy stuff around. Just in general, although that is a useful tool to do, you shouldn't do that in most paintings because copy pasting, say, an eye. You know, if it was a more detailed eye, you know, it would be obvious, right? Doesn't matter for this, but just so you know, don't go crazy with it. But that's the sort of the value you can have. Oh, isn't that so useful? All these marquees. No, I'm going to show you something more useful. Below the marquee is the lasso tool. It's going to default you into polygonal lasso. Go to regular lasso. It's L. This one's what you're going to want to remember. From wherever you draw, you create a new marquee. So now you can go, hey, I want to take an eye and a half and enlarge them and make the whole man a face. This is something you so beautiful. Beautiful gift Photoshop has given to the world. It's so good. And that's more useful than a regular marquee tool most of the time. Because you're going to be, this is mostly about drawing things, not, graphic design. But you use Photoshop a lot to do things like make stuff for Roll For It, like promotional stuff. The square marquee tool is probably going to be more useful for that. And there's also the rounded marquee. And in Lasso, that polygonal lasso tool will basically make a section out of fixed points. So that's really useful if you need to do something square and row body, you know. But you have to click at the end and it'll show you when the end is. So little trick, it'll show you where the end is because it'll have a little circle. It'll have a little circle beside it. See, now you're just making a tesseract. And we don't respect that here. We don't want no fourth dimensional shapes in our Photoshop. If you press escape,
oh god,
it'll cancel.
It's like, how do I stop it?
Like most things like that. But if you do use this before, and I think you will use this quite a bit actually. There's multiple. It'll be where the little circle is down there, which will mean boom, collected, and then it'll do this sort of zebra thing, and it'll do that. And the thing with it being a pixel-based tool is you can zoom in. And you always have the same degree of accuracy until you get really, really into the pixels. And in that case, that's a whole other thing that we'll delve into another time when we get into the quantum realm, right? But what was I going to say? So the thing about tools that I was actually going to say later, but I didn't even realize the lasso tool came up so soon. It looks like a lot of things, especially bear in mind that most of these things is actually 3 or 4 things. But the thing about Photoshop, and the reason why I think Photoshop is the best, is that most of these tools all follow a similar logic. I'm going to teach you about brushes soon, and about 70% of things you're going to use on a regular basis work like brushes. Not everything is a brush tool, but they work using brushes. And similarly to the lasso tool, there are multiple other things where you create paths which work in a similar way. So now that you're starting to learn how to use the lasso tool, that is something that you're going to be like. It's a skill that can be used with other tools. The magnetic lasso tool, I honestly don't remember what that does. Oh, that makes like a path.
I use this one the most.
Do you?
Yeah, because it auto goes around edges, which is super nice.
I've never really used that before. But I can see where it's useful, right?
Yeah.
That'd be really good for if you didn't separate your layers.
How do I get rid of this?
Control D.
Control.
That's one I didn't even think about telling you because that's complete muscle memory at this point, you know?
No, it's still there.
And a thing to say, it's not.
You should do it twice.
You just, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. The thing to note about this, when you have zebra mode, you can't draw outside of the zebra. You can only draw inside the zebra.
Oh, that could be kind of handy.
Exactly, right? One of the uses for the polygonal lasso tool is like making the shape of a spaceship or something, like very boxy, and then filling it in, and then you have a nice crisp shape. But that's useful to remember because, say, for example, you copied an eye and you moved it across, and you're like, why can't I draw anywhere? That's why. Because sometimes you can't even see that you've got something selected because you've got like a very small eye somewhere, you know? So that's just something to remember. Some of the other tools use a similar logic where you can only draw inside certain areas and you have to disable a lot of it. And then we're going to continue moving on. So go to brushes here.
I think where we left off was...
well, this is interesting, Fee.
We were talking about brushes, and there was someone in chat, and I hope they're still here and they didn't...
The question that killed the stream
question that killed the stream.
How to make new brushes and where to make
new brushes, exactly.
Now, that's actually what I'm going to talk about, basically the whole second half of the stream. We will be teaching how to make new brushes, and what I am saying here and now, if you are using this as a tutorial, starting from scratch, is do not get new brushes from the internet yet. That is a future step. Brushes are fun. Brushes are one of the reasons a lot of people get Photoshop. It is fun. It is easy to use a lot of brushes to cheat a lot of techniques. We're not going to be teaching.
You can make brushes that have like little mountains and stuff for maps.
You can do that. Exactly. We're not going to be teaching that yet because that is a crutch. And the whole thing about this series is that I'm going to be teaching you the bare bones of everything so that in the future, you don't need to do everything. Everything will become natural. So when it comes to brushes, I actually gave Maggie a very simple brush set to start off with to learn a little bit more about brushes, which we will make available somehow. But other than that, when we start teaching brushes, which will be pretty much the whole second half of this, will be about how to use brushes, how to tweak brushes to your liking, all that sort of stuff. More or less, the lesson is do not buy brushes online. And this was the best lesson that stuck with me the most from all of my uni teachings was to really master Photoshop, to master being a digital artist, you need to master the basic brush. And that's what I'm going to teach, in theory.
In theory.
Exactly. The hard way. This is the hard way. It is the easy way to use a whole bunch of cool brushes and just to cheat some mountains. And we will actually do a whole lesson about how to do that properly. Speed painting use of brushes. That is a future thing. It'll be like episode 39 or something. But right now, let's not worry about it. Because right now, we're worrying about tools. Below the lasso tools. And we're not going to go through all of this tool list yet. I'm only going to go through things that I think will ever become relevant. There's a few things that I don't think will ever become relevant. Under this is the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand tool is glorious. The Magic Wand tool, basically, you've probably used it before, Mag. It has two forms. It has the Magic Wand tool and it has the Quick Selection tool. Quick Selection tool, they both do a very similar thing in different ways, which is select things quickly. Quick Selection tool, you go, and it's like, hey, I think you meant to select the middle of this. And then it picks the whole thing up. These two things are on the same layer. Because I sort of spammed over here, it does that. If you do it over here, it'll pick up these guys and not that. The Quick Selection tool is very useful. The Magic Wand tool is a more precise version of the Quick Selection tool, but is more specifically designed for how to use selecting colors. As you know, I do this. It'll only take those areas because what it did is it selected everything that was around this shade of gray, right? So when you are working with a lot of colors, a lot of shades, that becomes very useful. And there's a system here called tolerance and a whole bunch of other options here on how to tweak it that we can go over in the future when it becomes relevant, but just so you know what these things do, so you can use them in the future. Next up is the cropping tool. Cropping is super useful. For these lessons, what we're going to do is essentially just have one big canvas. Now, what it started off defaulting is it's going, hey, this is the only thing in your painting. Isn't that the only thing you want to be in your painting? So what it's doing right now is it's cropping, and if you press enter, and you say yes, If you say no, it gives up. If you say yes, it'll basically resize the image to that.
I like that it only grabbed the smiley face. That's the only important
part. That's because
part.
it's the only thing that it thinks is relevant, and it may be what actually has happened.
You know what Photoshop
you know why
with you?
Do you know why it's doing that? Because you didn't control D, and the smiley face is still selected.
Ah.
So it was the crop tool is intelligent. Everything in Photoshop is intelligent. So because you had that selected, it was like, oh, well, you've already got this selected. It's the only thing you got selected. That's the only thing you want in the image, right? And it's like, boom. And it can be very useful if you want to make different images. But what we're going to do for most of these lessons is just have one canvas, and then you're like, oh no, I filled my image up with little smiley faces. You just go aside, drag it, drop. Then it does something a bit weird. It fills it in with a different color. If you see, ignore this side for right now. Down here it has colors. Photoshop always has two colors on the go at once. Your primary color and your alternate color. When you extend something with cropping, it'll use your alternate color as the backdrop. Of course, you can just fill that back in. So right now, yours are black and white, and that's how it will start most of the time. Though I'm fairly sure every time you open Photoshop, it will save those colors from the last time you saved a Photoshop file. If you press X, it swaps between those colors. Super useful later. Gonna go more into that later when we do mess around with values.
Oh, that's cool.
But basically you can have two colors on the go at the same time. Very useful for me, very useful for like painting natural skin tones and stuff and going, hey, these things sort of blend them together naturally. And that'll be when I actually teach you how to like paint skin tone and stuff. Which will be after we learn how to paint skin and then muscle and bone and blah, blah, blah. That's sort of how I do it, is sort of alternating colors very quickly, and X is one of those hotkeys that is a need to know because it's super useful. But that's how we're going to use most of these. I'm going to say just have a canvas and just update the canvas whenever you need it to be bigger with crop tool, because it's very good when you're doing a lesson to have everything on the same canvas, so you can go, okay, these are the relevant things I've done, and then you can save it in the end and be okay. Does the crop tool have any friends? It does, but those are nasty, and we're not going to talk about them right now. Those are some confusing things. Eyedropper. So the eyedropper, sure, it has a button. Most of the time you're going to recognize it as Alt, because when you're in the brush tool, Alt selects the eyedropper tool. The eyedropper tool, wherever you select it, it'll make that your primary color. And I'm fairly sure if you right-click it, it doesn't do anything. Never mind. It makes that your primary color. Again, super useful for the way I paint.
Whoa.
Ooh, what are you doing there?
When I right-clicked with Alt, that's what I did.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other thing. But the eyedropper tool selects whatever colors on the base, the buttery biscuit base, and then you go up brushing and you go, oh, I want foot shade gray. There we go. Great. That sort of thing. Super useful in the future. Eyedropper will get confused if you don't have a layer most of the time. You can disable that by having it sample all layers, which is what you probably want to select it to for doing things like illustration. So I have in my files, 20 odd folders. I can't go between how the colors work, and that's not even how I paint on color, and I'll explain that in the future. If you go to Eyedropper and you go sample all layers, then that's not going to complain. But you can go sample current layer and below, all that sort of thing. And a lot of similar tools have that similar option of like, oh, I don't want to select that layer. The Magic Wand tool has that same option of only select one layer or other layers or stuff like that, right? Super good. The healing brush, not gonna worry about that yet. Healing brush is something that is mostly used for like actual like photoshopping photos together. The brush tool. So brushes. Let's learn you a little about brushes. So, if you open up your brushes, I gave you these brushes called penguin brushes. Don't worry about those right now. Go all the way to the top, tippity top. Go to general brushes and go hard, round, pressure size. Just the fourth one down. This is the most default brush that is designed to work with tablets. So what that means by pressure size, it means it's going to be bigger where you push down the most, smaller when you push down the least. This is the most basic of brush for our purposes. It's going to paint whatever color you tell it to paint. It's going to work exactly how you want it to work. Now, why, Ollie, why are you giving me the most boring basic brush? Well, because I can now teach you how you can edit your own brush. But of course, as you can see, there's nothing wrong with using this brush. I don't use that brush anymore. I've given you new brushes to sort of show you different ways to go. As I will teach you things, you'll discover how you like your basic brush to be. My basic brush, for example, that I use for most things, actually has some texture in it. It's nearly exactly the same as the basic brush, but it has this sort of stonework texture that it gives all my paintings a very painterly, artsy style, and I love it. I love it a lot. But it's mine. You can't have it. But
sorry, someone said healing brush sounds like something I need for my sadness.
Healing brush sounds like a cleric spell. So up here is where your tool settings will be. As you noticed when I said like with the brush tool, the lasso tools and all those things, it has slight abilities up here. But for brushes, the brush tool and tools that use brushes, which is a distinction, but how I'm going to sort of describe it, they're going to be very similar. This area up here, boom, it's more or less a quick version of brush selection. The most useful thing is that you can change the size up here. Oh, that's pretty useful, change the size of your brush. That's really good. By default, Photoshop will have your brush size showing. If that's annoying to you, press caps lock and it disappears. I don't know why that would be annoying to you, but if it is, just do that. But you might be saying, oh, I'm going to be doing a big painting. That's going to get annoying, going up here and changing the brush size every time. You'd be right. That was an impression of you, Maggie. I feel like if I was going to do a Maggie impression, it'd be much better, and I'm not going to even try. I'm going to have to try that, like, in private. But, isn't that annoying? Okay, here is...
I can right-click on my thing, and then it actually shows...
See, exactly. If you right-click while using the brush, it's much more useful. And if you're using these tablets, there is a right-click, which is useful. But if you go to your keyboard... So how I always paint, and I can't really show you this without messing around with my camera, is
you have, like,
I always
one hand on your keyboard.
One hand on my keyboard, one hand on...
That's what I'm doing too.
Yes. So if you go to square brackets beside enter, square bracket left makes your brush smaller, and this works while you're painting too. No, it doesn't. Never mind. I thought it did.
Oh, okay.
Square bracket right makes your brush bigger. That is what I use to change my brush size. I constantly change my brush size while I'm illustrating brushwork and stuff for like basically simulating paint, right? Oh. It is a one of those things that will just become such muscle memory. You won't even think about it.
Yeah, that's super useful.
This is one of the, like, I mentioned to you, part of the reason why this is so boring in most part is that some of these things are so useful. I need you to know. Next up is brush hard. It has here is brush hardness. That more or less is how sharp the edges of your brush are. When it comes to really customizing brushes, which we'll mess around with later, that is something you can tweak even more. And it has its uses in general. It has a lot of uses, and there's a lot of ways you can sort of tweak these to make your perfect brushes for every situation. I will say right now that I often don't... it's kind of hard to notice because you're using such a middling gray right now. If you go to a darker black, you'll be able to tell a lot more. No, don't delete them. Save those doodles for later.
No.
Do what I said. Make a bigger canvas. Save them. Draw near them. You want them. You're gonna want to be able to see your progress.
No.
You can do what you want, I guess. For this, it doesn't matter. When we're actually like drawing people and things.
Oh yeah, when I'm actually drawing stuff, I'm totally gonna keep anything I actually draw.
Now we're just sort of messing around with files, I guess.
Yeah.
But hardness
is so funny. No.
More or less, there are. You could have saved those doodles and shown everyone later.
No, they're so bad.
But that's the point. The point is that it's bad now because it'll be good later, right? There are a lot more settings than just size and hardness, ladies. But it.
Are
you sure? Oh. But it's not Later, different area. We're gonna go across to here. Here is mode. Mode is something that you can mess around with brushes, and I will explain to them with brushes, but I use them on layers. So these modes here, it basically is how the paint, how the pixels interact with pixels below them, right? So a dissolve brush is very easy to tell. It basically sort of pixelizes it, kind of. It's much easier to tell on a dissolve mode. It's much easier to tell on hardness. It basically is like that old airbrush mode in like MS Paint, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, the dissolve mode is weird because it kind of acts unlike anything else. All the other modes decide how it works. Behind means it will try and paint behind other things on your layer. Doesn't really work, don't try and rely on it. Clear is basically another version of erase. Again, don't really worry about that. When it comes to these, each one of these sections is something different. So darken, multiply, all of these are darkenings. All of these are lightenings. These are overlays. These are, and these guys are like entirely different things. So it's easier to tell with lightens. If I go to lighten and I go to sort of a random color and I start painting on top, but I go to like a slight gray, that gray is going to be like lightened on top of things. As you can tell, it doesn't really work. You can tell here, you can tell sort of here that works. This is something that you can do on a brush by brush basis. You could tweak it in the middle of the paintings, but why this is important is not for brushes. How this is important is for layers. If you see this area up here, there are in the layer section, you can change all of those for on a layer by layer basis, and that's where some really cool things can happen in the future. That is some really good stuff for when we do things like lighting and shading. You can do some really good sort of cheatsy techniques, even though I'm saying things are going to be done the hard way. For when you don't do it the hard way, this is the way to do it. Really good for adding like depth and being like for overlays. You know, you can have literally a texture overlaid on top of a painting and it won't destroy the original painting. It'll sort of translucent-ish it to itself. It'll be a lot easier to see in practice in the future, but just so you know it's a thing. Next up, on my exciting wild ride of things, make sure you've changed your mode back to normal on both your layer and your brush. That's what you're going to want it on most of the time. You're not going to see a lot of interesting things because we're working in black and white right now. When you have colors interacting with colors below it is when some really cool stuff happens with mode, which is super exciting. So make sure your brush is changed back to normal, not lighten. And find a color that's nice for you. What I already like is that you work gray on gray. That is how you should work. That's sort of just how it works best, because then you can go, oh, this will be where shadow is. This is where lightening is. And these sort of brush techniques are mostly going to be used for sketching. And we're going to be starting off with sketching before we get into crazy rendering. Not entirely true, actually, with the lesson plan. But that's where things some super valuable can happen in like the concept art place, is working gray on gray. So the next thing up is opacity. What's opacity? It's how opaque it is. Come on, it's how translucent it is. You can have something be 50% translucent. This you can do on a layer by layer basis. If you notice, layers have opacity and fill as well. But often you do want this on a brush basis. Unlike a mode, you do want to go, hey, I have this brush that's 50% translucent. And I can make a bubble beard. You know, this is super valuable for simulating paint, for doing all those sort of things, but just doing exactly what you're doing now to having like smaller, finer details. Next to opacity is flow. So opacity is how opaque the entire paint is, essentially the paint on your brush, right? Easiest way to imagine it. Flow is how heavy your brush is, if that makes sense. So if you lower your flow to like 35%, you'll notice that on the default brush, it does some really weird stuff. If I go to like one of the brushes I gave you, what it's basically doing is it's it's smoothing out the ends. It's making the end, like where you're putting less pressure on the brush, more transparent than when you're putting more pressure on the brush. That's how you actually describe flow. Not all the things I've said, but the way to sort of simplify it in your mind is sort of the weight of the brush. It is why I said that Photoshop's really useful if you are using a tablet, because this is a thing that interacts with tablets on an every brush tool basis. Works this way. When you have a brush that is designed correctly, you can do this very smooth to hard to smooth to hard. And when you're sketching, this is what you want. You want this very, very low. I actually, my standard sketching brush is this. It has a 60%, 20%. And it means I can sort of put more detail on top of things to cement it. I make the brush very small. I start sketching. I start sketching things. And that's how I paint. So actually a complaint you had, Maggie, when we started setting this up is that these brushes are very pale.
Yeah.
Some of that is because you're using a really weird gray. But half of that is because you paint with a very big brush when you're doing things that usually you'd want to be quite sharp. So when it comes to brushes, Photoshop comes with some defaults. Again, don't worry about it. I gave Maggie a set of brushes called penguin brushes, right? They're basically really good for teaching, really good for sketching. This round brush, if you are trying to sketch like this, it's not really going to work. What you actually want to do, and just to get into the more practice of it, is when you are doing these sketching line drawings, is minimize your brush a lot more and push a lot harder on the tablet. I know it might feel like you're going to break it, but you're not. You got to remember that the tablet thinks when you're pushing as hard as you can push, that's 100%. And anything less than that is not 100%. So you're not going to be putting down 100% if you don't do it. So on a brush like this one that is got a very smooth painting, you really need to master that. And that's one of the things, because you're new to using tablets, that is a bit weird, because if you did that when you're using like an iPad or something, that would be crazy. But these drawing tablets are actually tough things, despite the fact that I've broken many of them in my life. In general, in brushes, it comes down to pushing hard and dragging.
We're making people want to draw, so that's good.
That's all I ask, right? Create. And part of the reason I gave you this brush in the first place is because it is very flowy. Now, of course, when you're working in such a middle, like you're working on a middle gray to a middle gray, everything's going to look pale, obviously, just by de facto, right? And obviously, as you paint more and more, you'll find out how sketching works best for you. I usually sketch gray on gray for this kind of thing. I don't sketch gray on gray on norm. I usually use a slight little splash of color, but color doesn't exist. Don't think about color. You see what I mean? You gotta really give it. Yeah, exactly. This brush has a lot of versatility in that it can be that sharp detail brush and it can be that sketchy armature brush. And I'll go more about that when we start drawing people, because this is the brush I use to draw people. This is my sketch brush. And then there's some cool things. Like, for example, if you're trying to show this to someone else, and right now, this might be quite hard for some people on chat to see. If you go to the layer properties and you select it to be a darken or a multiply, it'll make those grays into much darker colors. Color burn might not do it, multiply should. Exactly, so what it's basically doing is it's multiplying that gray onto another gray. So because that's a very light gray, it doesn't do so much, but you get what I mean, right?
Yeah.
In general, you're going to want to work on a slightly darker color, because what you can do, Maggie, is you can always make that layer dimmer in the future. So your thought process might be, I'm painting in a light gray now so that I can paint in a darker gray later.
Yeah.
You paint in a dark gray now, and then you dim the layer's opacity, But that's something we will get into in more proper paintings. Because we're not done with brushes yet, Maggie. No, we're not. Okay. We would be if this was a year ago.
There's so much brushes. Okay.
But there is one more option.
All right, there's more
that
options.
is new. Smoothing. And smoothing is actually something that was in other tools and not
back to 100.
Yeah, put those both back to 100 for now. Smoothing is how smooth the brush is. Basically what it is, when you draw with smoothing on, every action, the computer goes beep 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 and basically makes the best line. If you go 100%
what does it do?
Smoothing, I speak droid, right?
Okay.
3PO.
Oh god, I do not like that.
And it sort of gives us a lag.
Oh,
you're gonna say, I
that's
don't like
a weird
that. Most
feeling.
things, there is a value to smoothing. Usually you don't want smoothing. But, for example,
I feel like if you're making swirly bits.
If you're making swirly bits, if you're making magic effects, if you're doing... you very rarely want anything to be 100 when it comes to sketching. You don't want smoothing 100. I occasionally go to like a smoothing 40 when doing some like hair or something.
Oh, yeah, I could see that being like a good hair thing.
Yeah, not all the time. And one of the things, those three tools up here, opacity, flow, and smoothing, you can change on the fly very quickly. How do you do that, Ollie? Well, with the numbers on your keyboard. So, if we do this, and we go, here is a brush with 100% opacity. Swoosh. If you go 5, it changes it to 50% opacity. Whoosh.
Oh.
If you go 1, it goes 1% opacity. If you double tap it, it'll go to that next one. So if you go 5.2, it goes 52. If you go 7.7, it goes 77. Super useful. No, see, here's the thing, Maggie.
It's doing flow right now.
You're doing flow. Do you have caps lock on?
I don't think so.
No, you have something different going on. What happens if you shift number?
If I shift?
Shift and a number at the same time. So yours is reversed. Yours is reversed, which is very interesting. I don't know if that's a setting we have or just because you have a newer version of Photoshop. For mine, shift is flow and opacity is normal. I don't know if that's something you want to change in the future, but you can.
So alt is smoothing for me.
Alt is smoothing. Yeah, alt is smoothing. Again, these are things where I don't ever tweak these manually anymore. It's all numbers. And if you watch an art stream of mine, you'll hear me clacking occasionally. That's me changing these options because they're not on screen. Funny enough, you press these options in here. Always use pressure in opacity and airbrush style build-up effects. Turn those off. Those are going to screw up with some things.
Turn off what?
You've just made black. So what essentially those do is those force enable some brush settings. What I'm going to explain when we get back to brushes in a bit is how to do that manually. So you don't, because sort of a lot of the thing with Photoshop is a lot of ways to do these sort of shortcut things where you can force enable smoothing and hardness and stuff like that. We kind of want to avoid that for now so that everything you do is conscious. So if you do build up effects, if you do flow, it is deliberate, right? And that's what I mean with a lot of the this is why we're going to be using basic brushes for a long time, is that it makes a lot of those thought processes more deliberate. And that's sort of a good way to learn any skill, is to not take those shortcuts.
It's so weird when this thing is lagging like that. It's kind of cool.
It feels like
really
lag,
cool.
Right? It feels like lag.
But it feels cool.
That.
It's like a weird lag.
It's sort of...
You have to experience it, people.
It is one of those things. But it has its value, and I know people who only paint using high smoothing.
What? Why?
Right.
I could see the hair thing that you mentioned.
Yeah. So usually smoothing is around 10. That's the sort of level of you don't notice it, but it is always making your lines slightly nicer. Right? So that's where you probably want it to be most of the time. Around 10, 12, I don't usually care. Put everything else up back to 100 for a while because we'll go back to regular brushes soon when I teach you how about actually changing brushes. Next up is the clone stamp tool. That is something, if I ever teach photo manipulation, which I have a very, I would need to learn more to do. Clone tool, similar to the heal brush, is a photo manipulation tool. It is basically you go, I want this to be here. You know when they Photoshop out someone in a picture and like a wall continues? That's how you continue its texture accurately. Then there's the history brush. The history brush? I can't even remember what the history brush does. This is obviously a sign that it isn't something that is necessary because I don't remember what it does. Restores an image to an earlier state. That's true, right? Something, again, this is one of those shortcut options that we don't want to use because if you use layers properly, if you think through your paintings, you won't ever need this.
I think I've used it for photos before.
Yeah, exactly. Some of these tools are more useful for photos than illustration. And actually in Photoshop, there are presets for like illustration suite, graphic design suite. Most of those, again, do mess with things that you don't want to mess with, but they have value. Hey, then there's the eraser tool. The eraser is an eraser. If you notice up in the top, it says mode brush. It's working like a brush. So you can change all the settings. You can change its smoothing. You can change its flow. You can change the opacity. You can only rub out 40% of everything. Very useful, especially when you're doing more detailed work to have, I quite often have a more flowy brush that can only delete parts of stuff, you know? It's undoing a brush. Yeah, exactly. That's how the history brush sort of works. But again, if you want to be a good digital artist, you don't want to rely on tools like that as much as you can for this kind of thing. Bear in mind that my practice is concept art for illustration. So that's sort of the way I'm going to be teaching Maggie. This whole thing, Photoshop, is very similar to the rules of Magic the Gathering. Everything is how I says it is until it isn't. There are always edge case scenarios where this tool has a purpose, even if I say it doesn't.
This has
so
no
that's how
purpose.
the eraser works.
Just kidding, it has a purpose.
You might say, oh, isn't that something that would be something useful to go like, oh no, I accidentally drew something I shouldn't. Oh no, I drew
I thought you were going to draw something phallic.
I went through many things in my mind before I decided to draw a cartoon poop. If you go E, if you press E is the shortcut for eraser. Whoosh, gone.
Oh, okay.
And then B is the shortcut for brush. So you go swoosh, 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 swoosh. Now I can draw what I wanted to draw, which is a much higher definition stinky poop. That is, again, one of those like muscle memory things that cement into your brain. And I have friends who, when they learn a new program, they sticky note all the shortcuts they need to use and put that to their screen. Might be something I could see you do it, because I know you're a very organized brain person.
Yeah, I think I'm fairly good on some of this because I definitely have used Photoshop before, but I could see that being a useful thing for some.
There might be some that are like a bit too super weird. Then below the eraser tool, and eraser and brushes have more tools that we'll mess around with later, but we'll get back to that. So then there's the paint bucket. Paint bucket works how you imagine it will. It fills in an entire space. It uses basically the same logic as the magic wand tool to figure out what you want filled in. So if you do this, so you're already starting with advanced techniques. Because you can marquee an area and then paintbrush it. Paint tool it. I don't know what I'm trying to say. What are you doing? There we go. See? Advanced techniques. And now always use whatever your standard brush thing is, and you can do that as a pretty cool thing. And you can also change the opacity and stuff of that as well. But there are other things here. There is the gradient tool. The gradient tool, which it always thinks you want more than the paint bucket tool, which is just a little weird. I do use it a lot. Makes a gradient. Whew, super useful. As you can see up here, there are a bunch of settings. I often use this where it makes a sort of semi-transparent gradient. Very useful for like blocking in shading. You can also make it do radial gradients and star gradients and many gradients that are super useful for many things sometimes. But no, gradient tool is super cool. It is definitely one of those tools that you're going to want to play around with and learn, just so you know how to use it in the future. It's very good for blocking in backgrounds, blocking in colors. And just like the other things, you can block in and multiply and blah, blah, blah. Good stuff. Then we have blur tool, the sharpen tool, and the smudge tool, which is below paint buckets and gradients. Oh, and the paint bucket tool is G. That's one of those ones where you might need that occasionally. So below this is some stuff that I think you will enjoy. They are useful in situations, but these are not like your... If you imagine, right?
Mm-hmm.
A box of things. See, it took a while for this bit.
How heavy is that box? Or do you need to lift more?
It's under things.
Okay.
I'm a gremlin man. My lair has many treasures. But imagine, like, if you had this toolbox, these would be the things you put on the top of your toolbox because you're going to be using them most of the time. Those are the things you want to memorize. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm telling you these, because these are like, if I use them, they got some value. You might. The fun thing about this is you might go away in your own time and be like, hey, I'm really using like the history brush. That's great. There's no wrong way to paint, although I am teaching you the right way. The right way to me, right? The right way to me is not the right way for other people, right?
Yeah, somebody's gonna watch this and be like, "You're teaching her all the wrong things."
Oh, a gazillion people in my YouTube comments are gonna be like, "This guy doesn't know anything," and that's true. I know I don't know a lot of things, and that's why I'm the perfect teacher. But
we learn together.
This series of tools here below the paint tool are basically tools to interact with your paint in a very physical way. So this blur tool, it blurs.
No way.
Yeah, whoa, wow. It's kind of hard to notice because it works like a brush, like a lot of things, but it has strength. And if you go like 100 strength blur, you really start to like make me think I need to put my glasses on. Next to that is the sharpen tool. Guess what is the opposite?
I have a toolbox with paints in it. It's how I organize all my oil paints.
When I used oil paints, right? And fun fact, I started off like watercolors to oil paints, you know, because my school didn't admit that digital art was an art form. So I learned oil painting at school.
I love oil painting.
Oil painting is very interesting to learn when it comes to digital art because of the layer by layer structure of oil painting. If you're doing oil painting in the traditional art as well.
Yeah, you have to like wait for layers to dry.
And you have to
the beauty of it is you can erase stuff really easily.
The sharpen tool, it sharpens. These are tools that if you've used any digital suite, these tools exist. And then you have the smudge tool. Smudge tool is fun and has some values. Actually, my smudge tool has a very weird brush right now because when I use smudge tools, I usually give it a cloudy brush so it makes it look more natural. Because you can do things like sort of make, you know, little tentacle arms or make fire. One of the easiest ways to make fire is with a smudge tool to sort of...
smudge. You can make poop with smudge.
You can make poop with smudge. And the smudge tool is super useful. I think it's probably the most useful of those lots because usually... actually, I use the blur tool sometimes because I don't like switching the hardness of my brush on the fly. So if I go, oh, that area could be smoothed down, just a quick flyover with a very low strength blur tool can often get the job done. I will say, there is a selection of filters. Filters is a whole new world that I probably will go over in another episode in the top here. And there are blur and sharpening filters that will affect an entire layer. So if that entire layer you need to blur, you pop down a Gaussian blur on it, everything blurs a bit. That'll be something I teach when we do more like special effects stuff. Because, you know, when you want to draw fireballs and stuff like that. And it is sort of a joke that like old web comics use just Photoshop filters as to be special effects. And, you know, it's true because they work. Next up. So if those three tools interacted with the paint physically, these interact with the paint on a color basis. So you're not going to notice anything because we're not using colors. So let me break my own rules because I'm a mad man. So the dodge tool, and these are super useful. These are actually very useful. These are good, very useful for very quick on-the-fly shading.
If your poop is red, you've got problems, so see a doctor.
Red poop, exactly. Well, why don't we try and make this poop not red using these tools available? The dodge tool basically lightens, essentially. What it's actually doing is dodging, and it's very hard to sort of describe what that does. So essentially it it brightens the saturation and also lightens it at the same time. If you increase the exposure a lot, eventually it'll just go to the highest saturation. Whereas the burn tool will lower the saturation. Not a surprise, but that's sort of how it works. The burn tool will eventually sort of go down to a sort of black, where the dodge tool doesn't go to a sort of white. But that's this is when I started learning how to shade on Photoshop. I use this instead of different layers, and it's very good for, you know, these are concept art tools, because, you know, basically if you don't know, concept art is basically the not what you see. If you go, oh, this is a game's concept art, that's usually not real concept art. Real concept art is very, very quick painting, and dodge tool and burn tool can very quickly go, here's shading, here's what it would look like with some semblance of shadow, right, without thinking about it too much. The sponge tool is
like mix it together too.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's what I sort of use it for. And the sponge tool I use a lot too, because the sponge tool just sucks the color away slowly. Slowly sucks color away, whatever way it feels relevant. And it's very useful. It sucks away the saturation. As you can see, it never takes it away completely. If you see on my color wheel, which is a little easier to tell, you have values, you have saturation. It essentially goes like down here, but it still has the same value. If you learn this tool, if you use this tool, you sort of figure out how it naturally works. But often I'm like, oh, I put too much like color in that area. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Less color, right? A lot of these other tools are things you aren't going to need. You do, of course, like you are a sort of person who uses the text tool. Text tool works like text tool. This isn't the sort of stuff I'm going to be teaching right now. Other things of note is that there are. I should probably teach the vectors. So there are ways to make just boom squares, boom circles, and they're down here. They make them in a different.
Yeah, this tool's cool.
No, exactly. I thought you would like the burn tool. The burn tool is really useful for exactly that, you know? Boom. That's now like a shaded splotch of ink, you know? And the cool thing about the burn tool and the dodge tool is that they're only going to burn things on that layer in that area, which is super useful if you keep your layers properly. And I'm not the kind of person who in paintings often goes, this is the layer for the armor, this is the layer for the armor trim. I don't often do that, but if you are one of those people, you can very much go.
And then like, dodge is like a nice highlight type of. Almost.
Yeah, you're getting it.
Pretty cool.
You're getting it.
It's cool. It's cool.
But there's down here. There's the stuff for making shapes. These shapes, when they make them, they are, what are they called? I don't even remember what they're called. They're called like vector layers or something. If you make this shape and you're like, this is really cool, I want to paint on it, you've got to right click it and go rasterize. That basically just makes it a normal layer instead of a digital, an editable shape. Because the way Photoshop works, these shapes can be, as long as they remain vectors, they can be edited. You can go, you know what, this circle needs to be polka dots. You can just do that, right? This sort of stuff does have value, but it'll come up more later on. Like, I kind of want to start us off on sort of sketching stuff, you know? Because that's sort of more, this stuff is kind of self-explanatory aside from the crazy stuff, and the crazy stuff you can usually just draw, right? In theory, of other cool things, this thing right here, it's been, I can't do that now.
We're gonna start a little sketchy.
You're gonna start a little sketch. You can use this to spin the canvas. Mine doesn't work because my document window is set up incorrectly. Sometimes that happens. We have the zoom tool, but if you've noticed, we just zoom with our mouse. Most of the time, if you go Alt Control Wheel, that zooms in your canvas, and that's what I use without even thinking about it. You can go Zoom Tool, but Zoom Tool does some weird stuff sometimes. But it's valuable, you know, if you really specifically want to zoom one place. But if you watch me doing an art stream, it's a lot of this. It's a lot of me zooming in on one place, zooming out and zooming back in, and zooming in and zooming back out and zooming in. It'll be quite interesting now if you do actually watch my art streams, and you did before and you embrace now. It'll be like, hey,
I know how you're doing the things. It's like a magic. It's like a magician when they tell you all their tricks.
Tell you secrets. Yeah. And I have tried to explain things in an art stream before, but like I think because I'm explaining it to you, it'll make a lot more sense. Mm-hmm. But that's pretty much the basic stuff I needed to teach you now. But let's go beyond the basics about brushes. You hold down on the brush tool.
Okay.
You have the pencil tool. Pencil tool, actually, I'm going to mention. The other ones I don't do very often. Pencil tool is basically a pixel art tool. It pixels everything. It makes a pixel. It still tries to emulate whatever brush you put into it. So if you have a brush that emulates a sort of flat, like a paintbrush, it'll still try and do that.
What is this? Oh, I got this, huh?
They may have changed things up. If you just press escape, yeah. Try and draw something with a pencil tool again.
Oh, easy.
Yeah. So the thing is there's some hotkeys that you'll do by accident when you're getting used to it, and that I think that's one of the hotkeys. I do that sometimes. Pencil tool is valuable if you ever need to do pixel arty things or just things that need sharp edges. It comes in handy. It's one of those things you need to know. The other types of brushes like color replacement tool. The color replacement tool is pretty cool, but ultimately there are better ways of doing this. It is value in a pinch, and the mixer brush is kind of like you oil paint. You know, have you ever done the kind of oil painting where you put a lot of paint on the canvas and you sort of mix it all together with like a scraper? Mm-hmm. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. This is that brush. This is the brush where everything is actually physical paint, and I'm gonna make the freaking noodle man, and it's great. I actually don't use this very often, but it has a lot of value.
I like it.
It's not really the way I paint, but this is one of those things where you might find this super useful.
It looks like a spray paint.
Oh, you are... That's interesting. That's because it probably has a spray brush put into it by default. Because none of my settings are default anymore, so I don't really know what default is. But this, like every other brush, you can put brushes in. You go like, oh, I want this to be this. You may notice that there's sort of a little thing where it's almost like capturing what's going on here. So if you go back to default brushes, this will be when I will explain how to adjust and edit your brushes in basic terms. Yeah, I'm gonna get rid of this Cthulhu Bloodborne horror too, for now. So, B, brushes, great. If you go here, this is brushes. This is brushes. Brushes is usually paired with brush settings by default. Your brush settings are just a little bit below. If you just go back to the regular, standard, 4th down brush in general brushes, you then go to brush settings. Brush settings is how you tweak this. So more or less this which brush you have selected. You can adjust the size. This section here is which angle the brush is facing. For a regular circle, doesn't matter. But here's the ticker, and it's what I said earlier. I'm going to teach you how to paint using a basic brush. It is the best way to learn using the basic brush and edited versions of the basic brush, which is why I gave you the penguin brushes, because the one I gave, that one in there, is, I would consider kosher for this. It is a basic brush in that it is a circle. It is a circle that has been tweaked in a way that it flows much nicer, in a much more sort of watercolory way, maybe. but it is still a regular circle. It is very easy to go, oh, I want to paint and simulate other paint. Right now, we're just going to go everything as a circle. If you're going to draw a tree, you're going to draw a tree out of circles. But the trick is how to make this simple shape as versatile as possible, and that's how I paint in the future. Here you can change the angle, you can change the roundness, which I think squishes it up, hardness, spacing is very important for tweaking your own brushes. So if you notice when I make my brush really big, it sort of like blobs. That's because the spacing is set to 25%. If you go to 0% or 1%, it won't do that anymore. And that's one of the things that's been tweaked on the brush I gave you. It's a very close spaced brush. So if you imagine whenever you use a Photoshop brush, it's much more obvious when you have a low spacing. It is always basically putting a shape on the canvas based on all the settings. Spacing is how close those shapes are together. So if you make a brush that is like a charcoal shape, you can really notice that this is just a bunch of separate JPEGs. But when they are smushed together, comes something very interesting. That can be super useful. For example, painting chainmail. You can make a very sparse brush and just go to sort of do a simple version of chainmail.
Okay.
And now we'll get into the real craziness. For now, just put spacing on near as low as possible, because then you get that smoothness that we want, right? For what we want here, we always want a smooth brush. Now we get into the crazy stuff. And we're in chat where you're like, hey, how do you do brushes? This is it. This is how you change your own brushes. Don't even worrying about get brushes from internet. That sentence was really bad and it wasn't deliberate. Wow. Don't even worry about getting brushes off the internet because you don't need them yet. I will, similar to how I said Magic the Gathering rules, in the future, I want to do a lesson about how to use different brushes. Like brushes that are, here are trees, here are branches, here's a stream, you know? There is a value to that. But not to start with. Like anything, you know, we want to teach the bare bones basics. So the most important thing in brush shape is shape dynamics. Okay. Shape dynamics is how you tweak that, like JPEG, right? Size jitter. So what jitter is randomness, essentially. So if you go to 100% size jitter,
ooh, it looks like a blob.
It starts to blob up. And if I go, I'm actually using the wrong brush right now, like an idiot. If I go back here, you can really tell, because it basically simulates the brush down below. If you lower your spacing again, you can tell that it makes a whole bunch of different shaped circles. This is super useful for sort of doing... You'll figure out how. You can make
a necklace, like a beaded necklace.
You could make simplified necklaces for this. It's also useful for, you know, those sort of painty brushes. I've made a graffiti brush, actually, to work for some stuff for your brother's channel. I made a graffiti brush using a lot of these jitter things. Minimum diameter. So that minimum diameter is very, very important. What it says right here is control pen pressure. That means it is asking your tablet how hard you are pushing. If you put it down to 0, it'll make the harder you push, the bigger it is. It's much noticeable when it's bigger. You can make this less dramatic. You can make it be less crazy. You can make it not exist at all. You can also just turn it off. You can just go control off. Boom, never exists. You can also do control fade, where it'll always basically paint the same way no matter what, which has some value. Dial. You know what? I don't even remember what dial does. Does dial. Dial does it. Tilt. But really, all you're going to need is pen pressure and occasionally pen tilt. So pen tilt means how the angle you're aiming your brush at changes it. These tablets aren't specifically designed for pen tilt as an option. More expensive tablets are. But it's kind of one of those options. It's not super valuable. When you're using more painterly brushes, pen tilting is sort of a thing that can be valuable, but not so much this. And then stylus wheel is your brush, or if your stylus has a wheel, please don't. It uses that, and that also is pretty good. But you want pen pressure on that usually. That is how that's super valuable for making sketching brushes. Angle jitter is more noticeable on some things that aren't default circles. So let me go to what the hell is this? To one of these charcoal brushes and make it a bigger thing like this. Angle jitter is how twisted the, or angle in control is how twisted the JPEG is. So this adds a whole bunch of variance and randomness. You get some shredded wheat going on there. It's interesting. You can also control these via angle. I don't think you can control via pen pressure, but roundness you can. You can go, I want a brush that is only as round. It's only round when there's pen pressure, I think.
Oh, interesting.
And that's a very interesting. You can mess with these forever and make a perfect brush. A lot of these settings you're not going to use so much, like roundness jitter has value, angle jitter has value. Roundness control, will you need that? Who knows, right? Maybe if you're trying to make like a sort of inky thing, that could be valuable. But what I find often comes up as very valuable is this is all the shape dynamics. You also have things like flip X, flip Y, brush projection. You know what? I don't completely remember what brush projection does. I think it's sort of a proto version of smoothing. Sort of just sort of paints in a very different way. I'll have to look that up. But that's shape dynamics. That's for changing the shape of your brush. Scattering. So a lot of these other things are turned off by default. For this brush. Every brush default is made in a different way. Scattering is how... so if you imagine right now, as you're painting, well, I can just say, literally as you're painting, it's doing these JPEGs in a very close together, as close as possible. If you turn on scattering, it'll just sort of go around your brush as much as you want it to go. You can do some real interesting stuff with scattering. And then, of course, you can have scattering be controlled by other things as well, by, like, pen pressure. But it doesn't super work all the time. And that's something that comes in handy. Texture is very valuable. This is one of the things where one of these things you probably don't want to mess with right now, but if you see in here, these are the textures that are built into Photoshop. You can add more of them. These you can call upon in multiple ways. There are like specific texture brushes, there are paint brushes and things. If you go, hey, here's a polka dot brush, what it's doing is not going, hey, I'm painting a polka dot. What it's doing is it's basically applying, if you can notice here, that polka dot texture to the brush tip, essentially.
I see.
Yes. So this is one of those things where you can make very, very specific brushes if you learn how to use this. It's one of those things where, again, I don't mess with this very often, but if you are someone who wants to make very realistic brushes to like simulate oil paint or something, this would be how you do it. You'd take a lot of time and effort to sort of do that. I don't usually do it, but you can do it. Usually you turn it off. And the interesting thing will be when you like, if you do get brushes online or even the brushes that are in Photoshop, you can see how they made them and reverse engineer them. And that's something I definitely recommend if you are interested in brushes. If you're interested in brushes and you're like, oh, I want more brushes, look at the brushes that come with Photoshop. Photoshop comes with a ton of brushes that are very varied, but they usually are meant to sort of simulate realistic stuff, but they don't do the best job. But if you reverse engineer them, you can see how they are the way they are. And then you can get into things like dual brush, which basically means it's two at once. I don't even completely like super understand, but it's very similar. It's very similar to texture, where instead of it going, hey, we're applying this texture to every brush tip, it's kind of combining your two brushes to one. You notice it more if I had two different textured brushes, and you can do you can get some really cool stuff going on. Like right now I just made this random brush that has this sort of like wispy thing going on around it. Why? I don't really know. One of the cool things about brushes like this, when you mess with like dual brushes, you can just splice together brushes and you get some really weird stuff, and you might like that weird brush and you might use it forever. I did that. That's how I've used my real brushes, is essentially I spliced all the settings of two brushes I really like together, and now I have my illustration brush that I use for nearly all of my projects. Beyond that, color dynamics. This is actually, color dynamics is one of the valuable multiple. I was going to give a number, but I don't know how many are really useful. So remember how Photoshop has two colors on the go at all times, right? You can do something really cool with your brush. You do this. You can have foreground, background jitter, where basically it'll look at both colors and it'll alternate between them. And you can have it be random. You can have it go between. You can have it change the hue of your brush randomly. You know, to make cool. Horrible worm. You can have it randomly change the saturation. This is where, again, a lot of those brushes that sort of emulate realistic textures do this in a very clever way. And if you are, and rarely will you need, actually, it depends on how you paint. I'm going to try and teach you in basically where you won't need to do this, but some people are like, I need to paint this situation where I'm painting someone who has like rocky skin. I'm going to make a brush that is their skin. And you can do that using this sort of thing, like getting like the jitters and the purity and all that stuff in the perfect way to make the right sort of thing and make a noodly worm. And as you can see, when you just sort of abstract it, you get really weird stuff, and that's sort of half the badass, right? Transfer is really cool. Transfer is advanced tablet using stuff. Transfer is basically a setting set designed for the feeling of your brush when it is using on a tablet. It essentially, what Transfer does is a whole bunch of settings for flow. If you go back to the brushes that I've been giving you, they automatically act as if they have a flow setting. That's because of this. It's because they have Transfer on them. So if you turn Transfer on, it automatically sort of gives it essentially flow, where it's automatically going, so you're using a tablet and you want it to be heavier in some places and thinner in others, right? It's essentially automatically giving you like a very flowy brushes. And then you can even make it go even further via adding even extra flow. And I do that. That's how I do it to get like the numbers I like. You can also change the jitter of the flow and stuff like that. And some controls I think are mostly locked out because we don't have the right kind of brushes. That just happens. The Transfer, one of those ones you want to play with if you're making a brush. If you're making a brush, you want to sketch. You should sketch with that. Ooh. Brush pose is very important if you're making a brush that has a detailed brush tip. This basically can tweak the way that it works. Working with circles, this matters zilcho. This matters nothing at all. Okay. But for making those other brushes, it's a bit more valuable. Noise. I assume you know what noise means in an artistic sense.
Yeah.
So if you don't, noise is basically like this level of like randomness that is applied. If you apply noise, apparently nothing happens. I could have sworn it did how it did, but maybe it doesn't. There are other ways to apply noise to images and brushes where essentially it just gives this sort of random...
I think it does. It just really
it might be really subtle. Or just because I'm using brushes of a certain color, or maybe because I'm using brushes of a certain way. You can't tell. I have definitely used noise before. Is super cool. But it's a thing. It might be doing noise on the edge of the brush. But noise, super useful. Wet edges. Wet edges, basically, kind of makes everything very transparent. And so in digital art, this is what they call wet. And it sort of like simulates how water is, kind of. Not really, but it can be used to simulate water or to get this very strange, or it's almost like a film on top of the painting you're doing. It has got value. Actually, I really like what you've made right there. I like that. That's cool. And it's one of those things where it's more interesting how it like sort of interacts with color. It's sort of got a sort of a natural build up with itself. And then next up is build up. Build up means if you had a very transparent brush, it would sort of double up on itself. Or if you had more transfer, I guess. I remember some settings sort of have some things sort of have this. It kind of means it can double back on itself, essentially, which is interesting. Again, can be used to create some very dramatic things. I have in my past used different programs that claim to be more of like it's a traditional painting suite. They use a lot of things like this. It's a thing. And then project texture and smoothing. Smoothing is automatic smoothing, and project texture is not important and complicated. There's a whole bunch of things about making textures that is more useful for photo stuff than for painting stuff. But that is essentially how to the different things you make in brushes. And you might say that's not even a lot of options, and it's not. But some people make some crazy talented things. And that's where we get to the brushes that I gave Maggie. They're called penguin brushes. I've been painting with these brushes for years of my life as an artist. This brush right here is a brush I used today. I use this for sketching. This is my sketching brush because it has the right levels of smooth versus sharp. You can do sharp things with it when you make it nice and smaller. You can tweak all the things and you can make it as good as you want it. And I like it. It also has some other brushes that Maggie likes a bit more. But again, we're not going to mess around with those other things right now because we're just going to learn how to use a regular circle. So here is where more or less the lesson becomes you getting used to your brushes, which is why I'm super happy that this whole time you've been doodling. You've been like, I'm going to try this out. Because getting used to how just a brush paints is super valuable. You might go, I don't like how pale this brush is. You could adjust the transfer settings and save it as a new brush. When you are working with brushes, you do have to save them specifically. It'll change it on the fly, but that doesn't change like the brush setting, if that makes sense. Yeah. So if you go, oh, I want this to not have as much transfer, you could do that, but then you'd have to save that if you want to go back to it. But it's very easy to organize brushes. In your version of Photoshop is more organized than mine because it's newer. Mine is just a whole mess because it didn't have that system in it yet. I hate it. But more or less, the rest of today's lesson, I don't even know how much longer we have, is getting you to feel comfortable using this brush. Because a lesson I will always give to everyone, which I don't need to give to Maggie, but if you are taking this as an I Am Learning to Art series, you might be me in the past going, I want to be a digital artist. I don't even need to use paper or paint. Use paper and paint. Learn how to draw with paper because it's just a valuable, transferable skill. The very act of drawing is something that will transfer with as many mediums as possible. I actually am a big fan of using charcoal to paint, to sketch. I don't do it as much as I should, but I have done it a lot in my past. And it's very good when you're learning.
Charcoal would be fun.
Charcoal is really good. I recommend, if you can get sketchbooks that are brown, and then you get white charcoal, black charcoal,
I'll make some trees for you, Derek. There's a tree.
And this will be, I haven't even talked about colors yet, or how to pick colors. So, in general, I will say you always want to have a color open. You have Navigator open instead right now. You can do that. You're probably always going to want color open because you're always going to be changing colors or want to have changing colors very quickly.
Okay.
This is what the default. The default color system is a mess, but if you click on the color thing here, it'll expand it even more. You can put in the hex. You can adjust it properly. Again, don't worry about the existence of color right now. Just worry about the grays and lights to grays, and assume that what you're drawing is the final product. So if you're sketching these trees, and you gave it to someone, they'd be like, "Those are some pale ass trees." So I don't recommend drawing in black, which is why we have a gray canvas. I always recommend drawing gray on gray, but like light gray on dark gray it is usually preferable, and that's just a thing that is good for. Oh, the sun is up. I wondered why my room's like that. The sun's up. Because it'll. I don't really know what I said. It's easier on the eyes. It's easier for you to see things as well. Just like it's easier on the eyes, it means it's easier to see. Duh. But it means it's easier to notice details. You might figure, oh, it's easier to tell what I'm doing in gray. I go right now, it's easier to tell what you're doing in gray. But for you as an artist, it's easier to tell what you're doing in gray. I have found, and I think you agree. Here is the test.
Oh, we have a test. Shit.
But you will do this multiple times.
Okay.
Here is something where if you've ever taken a digital art lesson before, you've done this before. And I'm so glad I'm doing it. The test is drawing a sphere. So, the obvious thing is a sphere is you start with a circle. And this is one of the best ways to simplify, test your brushwork. And by sphere, I don't mean the actual... the circle doesn't need to be bang on. To be entirely honest, we could cheat with the size of the circle, and we probably will do that for future circles. No, well, I don't care about how smooth the outside the circle is. If you've seen my drawing, you've seen my sketch work, it's incredibly sketchy. That's not what matters. What matters is using these things and tweaking them and making a sphere that has light and dark in places sort of makes sense. This is the test of how of learning your brushwork.
Okay.
You can draw trees, but if you can draw a sphere in a way where it looks like a 3D shape, sort of. Okay. It doesn't need to be perfect. This sphere is pretty terrible. If my tutor from uni was looking at this right now, I'd be like, man, it sucks. But it's less about actually what you're drawing and how you're drawing it, right? That's what this is about. And of course, changing your brush on the fly to get what you want to get.
Oh gosh.
We'll get to those things later on, the metaphysical, the crazy challenges. But right now, you've got to be able to draw a circle.
I thought about it, and I thought there's an easier way to do this, probably, to make a circle, but I won't.
So there is an easier way to do this.
There's an easier way to make a circle, for sure.
Mm-hmm. The challenge isn't making the circle, the challenge is shading the circle.
Yeah, the shading of the circle.
But...
I think I could do it...
Do your easier way, do it like to the side, just see what it is. If you want to do that.
I'm not actually sure how to do it, is the problem. I know how to make the shading easier by doing
Explain to me what your plan is, and I will help.
I'd like to make a shape, which I figure I can do through making, using this
You can make a shape, or... So technically, yes. So what that's going to do... Actually, that's perfectly fine. So you've just made two shapes there by accident. So just delete the second one.
How did I even make a second shape?
It's because the shape tool kind of works a little weirdly. So, I'll actually tell you a way to do this a little easier.
What the heck?
Yeah, you kind of. All right, let me show you a way to do this easier. No, in fact, no. First of all, you must do it the way that Bob Ross intended, without the cheating, and then I will tell you the cheat technique.
So don't
because this is all about just using the brush and other brush tools. So you can use smoothing, you can use sharpening. Okay. Tell me how. Just do it. Just you master the brushwork. Okay. Because this is about mastering the brushwork. I'll show you how to cheat it in a bit to make like a perfect circle. But not yet. If you just click one of those, it should reset everything. Yeah, you must have been on a brush that had like a lot more. Oh no, just draw off there for a second, draw like a line. This is what I was telling you about, where it glitches out and sometimes it only draws half strength.
Oh, okay.
That's why. Just draw like a bunch of lines for me. Like as hard as you can.
Oh, okay.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
It's because I need to draw harder.
You just weren't drawing harder.
Draw harder.
I'm scared for a second. Exactly, and this is part of the point, right? You gotta learn to go hard on it. No prisoners.
I'm a light drawer.
I know, and you got to get out of that because that isn't
what just happened?
Any favors. You just painted the background in
That's not what I intended to do.
I know, your brush is 5,000 pixels big. That's what you've done.
Oh, okay. Well.
So remember that you can also change the brush with your square brackets on the fly. We gotta get you into the technique of drawing harder, because having that light touch will be useful in other ways as you find your own style more. But just in general, you want it to be an option, not the always, you know?
Okay, I know it's not perfect, guys, but
it doesn't.
It's a circle.
The thing is,
okay?
with digital art, it doesn't need to be perfect right away because you can tweak it.
Okay. And then
you probably want your color is there. It's just under your properties tab on your right.
Is it?
Oh, what are you looking for? Are you looking for sharpen?
I'm looking for. Is it burn?
Burn and dodge. Burn makes things darker, dodge makes things lighter, sort of. Now, burn and dodge don't work perfectly on gray, but you know what? Why not experiment with it? See what happens.
I see what you mean.
Because they're designed to interact with colors.
I see.
They interact with saturation explicitly.
So it doesn't really work.
It doesn't work in this situation, but good hustle. Good idea.
Oh, man.
If we were making colored circles, which is test number 3...
Okay.
Good idea.
Well, then.
This is one of the reasons why we aren't starting in color. Because that cheating is smart, but shouldn't be the norm.
My smart cheating is not good. I don't think...
There's a lot of... Exactly what I mean. Like, there's a lot of smart ways to do things. I don't want you to do it the smart way. I want you to do it the caveman Ugg way. And bash rocks together until you make art.
Okay.
Because by doing it the hard way, you'll learn. So right now you're in the smudge tool.
Oh, sorry.
Just so you're aware.
Okay. I did not realize I was.
Mm-hmm. You'll get used to it in time, especially as you use hotkeys more and more.
I think this is a lighter color than the black that
I think it's a lighter color, but very barely. So what we want right now is a dramatic shading between. So you know how spheres look in like.
I mean, I don't have to go dramatic yet.
No. So actually, I'll explain this afterwards. This is I'm trying to get ahead of myself. I want you to sort of just do it your way. I'm helping you do it your way.
Wait, am I trying to do what you're doing?
No. Well.
Okay.
In concept, ignore the face.
Okay.
In concept, yes. Imagine a
do I want
sphere
the
that is
lighter
lit
bit
from
than
one
right
source.
here?
Essentially, yes. Imagine a sphere that is lit from one source, because it's usually quite simple, because it just the light sort of slowly washes over it, essentially. Don't stress out about it. It's just a sphere. It can't hurt you. The trick is to make something that looks 3D. And probably the answer will be no. And that's okay. Because making something look three-dimensional, I just dropped my stylus pen. Making something that looks three-dimensional and real is one of the hardest things, and it's really the step between amateur art and professional art. But in concept, it's making you think about how you use your brush. It's making you think about what color to use, what size to use. That's why it's test number 1.
It's a good, I can see now.
I had to do it.
I think I just was gonna do a light source coming from a different place.
Well, you can do a light source coming from whenever. That's fine, as long as it makes sense.
Okay.
And when you learn about lighting in the future, you'll figure out that I actually am very relaxed in how I use lighting. So I don't really mind as long as you do it good. You could do light coming from just flat onto one side if you want. Exactly. You did these art tests in art class in the back with see, I have done it with charcoal as well. But it's a really good one for digital art because you can go back and you can tweak. You could paint a sphere for an hour. You shouldn't. You could.
I could see someone
make it perfect. Make it even have texture on the sphere. And you could do that. Me, Ollie, I'm a first draft person. I very rarely go back and tweak things unless it's professional work. When it's just for me, like that's it. That's done. I am declaring it done. I could tweak it forever. I don't do that. Maggie is not one of those people. So I'm gonna try and get you to do a middle ground in general. But for this, just keep going until you think you're done. You know?
God, I don't know. I'm a perfectionist. I don't like it.
Or until I stop you. I should have given you a timer.
Yeah, you should have given me a timer. That's what you should have done.
Doing vases to work on shadows? Yeah. We'll have a lesson where you have to draw some flowers, as everyone has drawn flowers.
Ooh, you know. I'm down with doing some flowers.
It's probably a good idea at some point. Maybe we'll do that next week instead of... I want to do the basics of sketching people because that's something you very much...
Give me a second.
...excited for. You just keep redoing it.
I know.
Well, that's good. That's good, because what you're doing right now...
I'm too nervous.
I was thinking, like, it's exactly what someone in chat said earlier, right? Oh, I'm so bad. No, because if you look at that and go, that's not right, that's a good thing. The bad thing in art is when you look at something and go, oh, that's great, when it isn't. And admittedly, everyone occasionally does that to themselves, which is why it's good to build a community of artists who can go, hey, wait a second, boyo, you did that wrong. Not in a mean way, but in a way that they will recognize what they're doing. It's good to be able to say, I didn't do that right. It's very good to say I didn't. And I still do that now. I've been painting for like my whole life. And I still look back on illustrations that I finished. I'd look on an illustration I finished today and I'm like, you know, I could actually spend a lot more time on that and tweak that. I know what's wrong with it. I don't really care to fix that. I could. It's something as an artist you probably should do, especially when you're learning. Look at every picture. And the trick is to wheel back on your chair and look at it from afar, because you've been staring at it pretty close. To zoom out and look at it from afar and see how it really looks. Because usually, a finished project isn't going to be looked up that close. So this is the thing that I said last time, right? What you are essentially doing wrong here is you're still drawing with a very small, tight brush.
Oh,
what
yeah.
you're trying to stating is you want large areas. You want to draw with large, potentially transparent, potentially high flow areas so that everything flows together. That's why I have this slight blend going on.
Yeah, I was wondering how you're getting that blend.
Yeah. That's because there's transparency involved. And what you're doing right now, you do sort of get that just because of how the brush is designed. And that's okay, but you're sort of doing it almost by accident instead of deliberately. Whereas if you go, oh, I want 20% opacity right now, and you go boom and do it.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It would give you a much easier time, and then you go to a lighter color on that light,
Up
like
here.
go to a lower opacity and go to a brighter white, and you put it on the middle of that circle in the light there. It'll blend a lot easier. Then if you use Alt here and grab a different color, and then you keep applying, it'll work a lot better. That is one of the ways to sort of do this sort of practice, and that's why I thought this was a good test, because
Totally a good test.
It's making you think. It's making you think about your brushwork in a way you wouldn't have thought about it, because you've done like oil painting and real painting and real sketching before.
So much different
This is
than
not
this,
an
though.
option. It's not an option. Exactly.
Yeah.
And the way you can adjust your brush on the fly. So what I was saying is sort of the way you've been shading, and I'm actually going to do this on here, is what you're doing right now is what you're doing.
Oh God,
if you want to look at mine, I'll tell you, like you've been doing this.
Yeah.
Essentially. When you want to do is this.
Gotcha.
So you started off when I started giving you these brushes, and we had like a chat before this show even started.
Yeah.
You were like, these brushes are so big, and now you've gone, these brushes are too small, and now you need to find just right.
Oh, because I'm not pressing hard enough.
Exactly. And then when you add in
It's
some
like-
opacity
it's
and
like
stuff.
I don't know. I don't know why, but it's just.
I think you just need to get used to, because sometimes also the
this is
way
what I
you
have.
press, it'll go, oh yeah, that's the opacity.
That's why.
Also, sometimes the way you press, your tablet will think you're trying to do something you're not, because it's dumb. But that's okay. So when it comes to shading as a whole, shading to start with is a very broad subject. Now this is almost a little mean, because I'm essentially giving you a challenge about rendering before we're even going to learn rendering. And that's kind of the point, because this is basically me seeing how much I need to teach when I teach this in the future. So don't worry that you're not doing well right now, because it's not about the spheres. It's about how you're painting the spheres. And even in however many spheres you've painted over there, you've been learning different techniques, and that's the twisty twoo of the whole thing, right? And then, even though it's kind of technically cheating in this project, you have things like the smoothing, the blur tool to sort of blend all the colors together a little bit more, and the sharpen tool to sort of sharpen your edges, stuff like that, which totally any other class wouldn't allow you to use, but I'm feeling generous.
You're like, I'm allowing you because you're a freaking scrub.
Well, no, it's more about, putting together what you have as an opportunity, right? Learning the basic brush also involves learning these other tools. But if you can do it just using the regular brush, if this was one of those courses where you have like, here's the question, here's the answer, and here's like the advanced answer where you get like a gold star, that's your gold star. Don't use smudge, don't use anything. Don't even use opacity. If you can not even use opacity and just go entirely off brush control, like I've been doing with this circle, then that's the next step. But of course, that's why, that's the brushwork basics of this lesson, is getting you to
I think the problem for me is then like the colors and blending it.
Well, exactly. That's me being a little mean, because I've not taught you how to do it yet.
Okay. Yeah, because I have no idea how to make them blend together. Does that make sense?
I kind of want you to just try using what you got. It's a pre-test. Yeah. It's like one of those things where it's like,
I hate tests. You don't know how much I hate tests.
Oh, you're gonna hate. There's tests. There's homework. No, I think this might be the only test I have planned. That's right, I have plans. All right. I think when you're done with this, I think that's the end of the lesson for today.
Okay. I don't know when I'm gonna be done with this. I don't think.
Well, here's the thing.
There's ever done. I think this.
If you want, I'm not giving you explicit homework today, and I will in the future. If you are kids at home, get pencils, get paper, just draw.
I feel like I could do this better with a pencil.
Well, here's the thing. If you want, this is a great homework actually. Try doing it with a pencil, because then you'll be able to sort of think about how you do it with a brush, right? Because everything you can do with a traditional tool,
but it's not the same as using a brush like a
no. But you can make it the same. You could use. They have brushes in here, which is kind of cheating, but just hear me out. To be like that are meant to simulate a pencil, and then you could kind of simulate it that way. But it'd be interesting just to see, compare. But if you do want to continue drawing spheres in your like free time, it'll be remarkable how much better you get at doing this. And this will be one of those things where just using Photoshop in general, you'll get better in this as time goes on. I will teach you how to shade in the future. That's not so much a thing today. Like the next lessons are going to be about sketching. So really mastering how to use your brush is very important for that, because if you draw like a very limp sketch, that can affect everything, right? And I want to teach you everything in Photoshop, so here's something that will be useful in many ways in the future.
Okay, well, as someone else mentioned, I'm like a super perfectionist, so this is gonna take me forever.
Exactly. And that's where it'll be pretty interesting. Because the whole intent of this series is to get Maggie to be able to go, here, this is my D&D character for the next game. And go like, whoosh. Not, people won't go like, oh, that's great, Maggie. People go like, wow, Maggie, that's actually genuinely good. And I'm not just complimenting you because I don't want to hurt your feelings. That's the aim goal. So we're going to, next lesson is going to be the basics of drawing people, and sketching will be much easier. You won't need to worry about sketching. And then, depending on how long that takes, I may even... All right, that's it. You're done. You're done. You got 2 extra bonus circles.
No, I'm determined to make a good circle. It's going to happen.
Down. This can be extracurricular time. Put the pen down.
Okay, wait, is there something else you want me to do?
No, I just kind of want to end the session.
Okay. Yeah, we can end at any point.
We can end it while you're doing your last circle for now. Okay. But there's the thing, you're wanting to try and get it perfect, and that's a good thing as well. Because you're looking at them and noticing what's wrong, and that's not a bad thing. Drawing something that's wrong is not a bad thing, because mistakes lead to success. And I did not start off drawing like a god, darling. No, I did not. I remember very much a memory of excited Ollie when he just started drawing like a lot, showing some art to a teacher, and that artist doing exactly what I said, where it's like, oh, that's so good. Of course, at the time, I wasn't wise enough to realize.
Well, wrap it up for us. Tell us all the things that we need to know
Which things in particular? About
I don't know. Whatever you think.
Time?
Whatever you think we need to know.
Next time we will be doing the basics of people and sketching in general. Sketching into people, and then we might even do like a hey, sketch these things. But I kind of want to teach you the very basics of drawing people because I know that's what you're interested in doing. Of course, one of the things if you are learning art, it is not a good idea to rush into people. It'd be one of those things where I'm just going to teach you the basics of people because Maggie, you doodle people. That's what you do. So why not teach those basics right now? Those are the interesting things. And then maybe go into, I'm not sure, depending how long it takes, maybe faces and hands might be a lesson all on their own because they are two very hard things to do. Or...
I can make people, but I can't make a circle, you guys.
It's fine. But also, this should be every Monday, weekly, at, well, for me, it's 3 a.m. British Standard Time. You're welcome. Every week, more or less, different lessons. If you have things you want to know about, do ask me. I have a lesson plan, and I can either fit it into a lesson that already exists, or I can make it its own lesson. So I'm going to go through a lot of basics of things quite rapidly, where we go through a lot of things, and then we'll start going into the details a lot more. Like, we'll do the basics of people. Then we'll do a little bit more about the basics of people doing like faces and hands, because that's very important. But I'm not going to expect you to be able to draw the best of any of that. But just so you have that knowledge, you have these videos to go back to, and maybe we'll go to landscapes, we'll go to...
I'm gonna look back on this and be like, the circles are the bane of my existence.
And we will return to circles. Because
and
we
then
will
I'll come back and I'll be like, circles. It is time.
Circles, I do not fear you anymore.
I do not fear you anymore.
Faces and hands, I know, I want that to be... They might be two separate lessons, honestly. Because I think there'll be one lesson together and then two separate lessons in the future when I go, like, listen here. This is when we get real. Feet are hard. Feet are hard. Feet, I might do hands and feet, to be entirely faces and hands and feet, because feet still, like, of all the things I have trouble with, I don't have trouble with hands.
Someone else was saying they have trouble with feet. I think, was it Miazilla?
There's a very important lesson I have to teach about feet in the future, which is a weird sentence, but it's true.
Y'all need to learn something about some feet.
You're gonna need to learn some things about feet, and I'll tell you right now, that lesson about feet, that's one of my golden secrets. So when that comes up, that is literally the secret about feet is the difference to me between a artist and a good artist. So, you know, if you want to up your game when I eventually talk about feet, and not on my own casual streams, you know, for my own amusement, that'll be something to definitely look forward to. And like I said, ask us stuff. Ask us.
Oh yeah. I think the plan is to just. We're gonna start, and we're just gonna keep going until I don't know, Ollie gets sick of talking to me and teaching me about art.
Yeah,
pretty much.
That's the plan. I'll never get sick of this. I get to laugh.
I know, it's pretty much like what you do all the time anyway. So
yeah, exactly. I would just be complaining. I'd just be grumpy to myself. If you like me and you've not seen me around before, I'm Ollie. You can find me at Twitch and Twitter at Olirant and some other places with some slightly different versions of the names. If you like this art stuff, I am a professional illustrator and I do post as much as I can.
He does commissions too, so if you need some artwork made, you should do it. I get lots of stuff made by him.
Mm-hmm. If you want your like D&D character drawn, I am one of the people to go to. I also do art streams. Are you doing
some more artwork on Roll20 as well, so people can grab tokens and
I do have some of my artwork is on Roll20.
I made a circle.
See, exactly. That's good.
I did it in a more timely fashion.
Here's the thing, right? That's one of the things when we do like advanced people drawing, there will be life drawing involved.
Oh yeah, I've done some life drawing stuff.
And the app I have for it has like speed settings.
Oh god, no.
We'll do some speed people at some point.
Speed people. Not to be mistaken with people taking speed.
I mean, some of these people in the life drawing websites may, but I draw art streams. I do art streams on Tuesdays and on Fridays. Usually, that segment is sort of like art streams. It's like I want to do game streams. Sometimes I just do art streams. Sometimes I just do game streams. It's whatever we want to do. My streams on my channel are very chill, and I also run my own D&D games, and I'm on a bunch of other D&D games. So if you do like D&D and art, just come hang out with Ollie. Have a good time. If I'm slightly more chill than when I'm in teacher mode.
Your teacher mode is pretty chill.
I'm like the cool teacher that plays movies in class.
Yeah, you're cool teacher. You got this. Well, thank you so much, Ollie. And like you know, he said there's a lot of different ways that you can reach out to him. He's also on our Discord server at Olirant if you want to tag him there. Tell us how much you guys liked it or didn't like it or whatever, and
what to change, what you want to see.
I'm sorry that the stream went up and down due to madness, but we'll probably figure out a way to resolve that for the future.
Vods will be on YouTube, edited down as well.
Yes, we will have this on YouTube. It'll be edited down. If you're
I don't know how we're gonna edit down all this circle drawing.
I think we're just gonna skip all the terrible circles. We'll skip all the terrible circles or fast forward.
Editor, speed through it. Fast forward. Looks great. I've done it before.
And if you know, you guys can always check out the stuff over there. Subscribe. That's going to be on youtube.com/Margaret Krohn Plays. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.
See ya.